I was more of an algebra guy myself. All right, guys. We've got a lot to cover today, so I'll get started here. I had a really good discussion with the other class actually this morning. I figured I'd try to recreate that. But the fun thing about discussions, of course, is that they go in all kinds of different directions. So I wanted to ask your opinions. I mean, obviously, I read all your papers. I'm a little bit behind on grading right now, unfortunately. But I'll get to that stuff as soon as I possibly can. I wanted to ask you guys about the Socratic stuff. So what did you all think about Socrates' view of the afterlife? Pretty interesting view. So Kennedy, I'll ask you first. What are some thoughts on old Socrates' view of what death might be? If you need to type, I'll let you type. Anyone who needs to do that, that's fine, obviously. And but if you can start your video and get your mics unmuted, I'll try to hear from as many as I can here. Kevin, since I know that your mic is working, let me ask you first. Then, so what did you make of Socrates' ideas on death?
I said that. Wait, do you want me to read it, or do you want me to just say it?
No, just summarize it. Summarize some of your ideas.
I talked about how his view on death is like when you die, you go meet people like legendary people, like the people that started the Trojan War, and people that started Greece and all that. Mm-hmm. And he also talks about how people, like, usually when they're about to die, they would like throw everything in front of someone. They'd be like, "Please don't kill me. I do this. I do that." Right.
Right.
But yeah, Socrates says it's better to die honorably than live with unrighteousness.
Yeah, very good summary. So what did you make of those ideas? Do you sympathize with them? Do you think there are some flaws in his argument, or?
I agree with them. I don't really see any flaws because all of it makes sense. Well, usually the first part depends on what you believe in, but I agree with the second part.
Yep. 100%. Yeah. The whole cowardly business is great. I mean, and when you think of Socrates, you can conceptualize death in a number of different ways. You guys may have been into a funeral in your life, I assume, maybe, and you can kind of pick it up at that sort of event. Not that you want to go to a bunch of funerals, obviously, but you can see the life of that person continuing after them. Especially if it's a person that made an impact and a positive impact in a lot of people's lives, right? So there's a material aspect of that. You can probably meet their children, let's say. But then there's, I would call it a spiritual aspect of it too, right? So you can see that person still living in those people's memories. Carlita.
So like I read it and I thought what he said was like true. Like I agreed with him. I liked how he wasn't afraid of death. And like I thought I feel like he said what most people were afraid to say.
And that's a very interesting idea. So in what respect did he say what most people are afraid to say?
Like just like the message he was trying to get across, and also like, because for me, I think like some people don't care if they die or they don't like run away from it. They're not scared of it, and like, but they wouldn't express that. But on the other hand, he did, which I think was cool in some way.
Yeah, it's an incredibly profound way of dying. Most of us will not die in quite those dramatic of circumstances, and the vast majority of people too, are not forced to commit suicide. I mean, it's just such a crazy thing. I mean, many of us will have an awareness that our end is coming. Because so many people end up getting some kind of terminal illness, and you end up dying in a hospital or hospice, or who knows what it might be. To kind of willfully choose that, and then to be able to think about the consequences of it, and actually be totally at peace with it, and also not even have fear of the pain of it, because I explained a little bit about the pain of hemlock, and a lot of people might even get pause in that regard too. You can imagine the value of it in some ways too, because Socrates' death, if he had been afraid, and if he had betrayed any of the principles he lived his life under, then it would kind of be an "I got you" moment, right? See, you weren't really that serious about philosophy, right? And you can imagine maybe even his detractors as, being able to get some kind of pleasurable revenge out of it. If he were afraid or if he were, backtracking on his way of life and things like that. So in that way, it was a very powerful thing. Lots more to talk about, guys, but maybe 10 more minutes on this because we do have a ton to cover to introduce all of Rome, but we can get into some really interesting angles here, I think. Michaela, what sort of thoughts did you have? We have a Michaela there. If you're typing, that's fine too. I'll kind of keep on jumping around, and I'll try to get you guys in here. Skylar, profound ideas. What was your take on Socrates's ideas about death and the afterlife?
I don't know. I agree with him because it was at the time it was a little different. It was weird, so I don't know.
Yeah. What do you think about this idea that death is because Kevin mentioned the one possibility, you go to the underworld and you get to talk to people and basically interview them or annoy them philosophically like Socrates got to in the rest of his life. What do you think about the other possibility, Skylar? So he also says death could be a dreamless sleep. What was your response to that idea?
I feel like we could get back in the day.
Yeah, sorry. Man, you're breaking up. You got the auto-tune voice going on. Yeah. Oh, shoot.
Man. Can you hear me?
That last thing you just said, I can hear you. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I feel like people would have believed it back in the day because they didn't really have they were still learning their religion, so I think they would have believed it back in the day. But I don't really know, other.
Yeah. Yes, for his time. I mean, what a strange idea, right? I mean, especially we live in a country with separation of church and state. We obviously have tons of different religious traditions in our nation, and a lot of those, and most of those religious traditions have some view of the afterlife. And there's a decent amount of carry through there too. I mean, when you look at Socrates' view, it's so strange in that context because it was not Athens was multi-ethnic in some ways, but primarily people adhered to the same religious beliefs. And then to come up with this idea that death may just be a dreamless sleep is pretty striking. And if you would ask a scientist nowadays, they might agree with Socrates, right? At least in terms of our material existence, right? It's very clear that you bury a corpse, right? When someone dies, whatever this is not animate anymore. And whatever animates it and keeps it alive, which is basically, electric charges pulsing through your, originating in, synaptic connections in your brain and then pulsing through this protein in your body, that's mostly water, and which is conscious of its own existence, which is completely insane. And at some point, all that stops because a critical function can no longer be performed, be it breathing or thinking, basically, or beating blood around the body. But this dreamless sleep is an interesting problem, right? Was anyone troubled by this idea? So Alexander, is there a hole we can poke in Socrates' argument about the pleasure of death as a dreamless sleep? Let's be critical of Socrates for a moment. Or can anyone think of any kind of problems with that idea? Yeah.
Well, there are some differences of how you die. Some of them might be painful deaths, while some of it might be slow. I know there's some venoms that if you have it, you have a slow death, and sometimes you'll die so quick that you won't even feel it. Mm-hmm. But other times you could be bled out or die slowly.
Yes, I mean, there's such incredible variety of ways of dying, right? And that's horrible to think about some of those ways. Hopefully all of us will avoid those painful, conscious ways. I, for one, would like to at least see it coming. But But yeah, it's a troublesome idea. I mean, now if we think about a dreamless sleep, I mean, the thing for me that's troublesome about that is what makes a dreamless sleep pleasant is that you wake up from it, right? Because you're not aware of the fact that it's happening as it's happening. So if we liken death to a dreamless sleep, well, then you're really just saying it's a complete state of non-existence, that is to say, non-awareness. And I, for one, am terrified of that idea, right? I mean, what I value about living my life is that I'm aware of everything that's happening around me. Even suffering can be really pleasant sometimes, because at least you're feeling something, and you'll know it won't last forever, and you know you'll probably learn something from it and become stronger as a result of having suffered through it. Right. So even there, you can kind of rationalize things and find meaning about it. So I've always found that a little bit of a strange view for Socrates. And I would even say that we might be able to take the reverse case of his idea of being able to speak with people of the past. So I don't know if Socrates intended this, but if we really think about it, he's in fact in dialogue with people in the future. Right. That is to say, you and I are talking about his ideas right now. And while we can't directly question him and ask him what he meant, or have an actual conversation with him, in a manner of speaking, we are, right? And that kind of gets to the heart of the idea, I think, where he's considering a spiritual existence of an afterlife of sorts, right? So that first example I brought up of, being in the memory of people after you die, right? So you can be in the memory of your immediate family, but you could argue that Socrates is in the cultural memory of all of humanity, right? If you polled all 7.5 billion people who live on the planet, there are billions and billions of people that would recognize the name Socrates. There are at least 1 billion who could probably tell you something relatively, cogent about who he is and what his philosophy is. And that's an extraordinary impact to have on humanity. And I do believe that Socrates may have calculated some of that and realized that, choosing the philosophical life and not wanting to end it before he died, or dying for it, basically, was worth it in the end, right? The longer calculation was better. Onan, how about you? You can have the last word here. What else can we say about Socrates' view on death?
I mean, I partially agreed with what he said for the most part. The part that I didn't really understand, or I didn't agree with, was the fact that he would rather choose death than on going to jail or something like that. I didn't understand that part.
Yeah, that's a heck of a decision, right? I mean, because if we read the dialogue Credo, that's what comes dramatically afterwards. I mean, his friend comes to the prison. He's his same age. He's an old man, and he says, "Listen, Socrates, you don't need to go through with this. You've proved your point. I can easily bribe the jailer. I'll give him $1,000, and you walk free for the rest of your lives. We have lots of friends in Thebes. You can live there happily and continue on with what you'd like to do with the rest of your life, right?" And I think most people would take that deal. It's not even your own money, first of all, and your friend is happy to do it. And Socrates refuses. It's such a strange refusal. And Onan, you're right to be surprised by that and not understand it. Because, if we've got 7.5 billion people on the planet right now, I think 7.5 billion people wouldn't do what Socrates did. There might be 1 or 2 people who might do what Socrates did. And the reason he did it was because he felt he would be betraying his city, even though it's killing him, right? So he makes this great argument about civil disobedience. So if you are a member of a community, you have 2 choices. If you disagree with the way that community runs things, you leave. Or your other choice is you can persuade them to act differently. And so Socrates made the claim that, well, I spent my whole life trying to persuade the Athenians to act differently than they act, and I ended up failing in the end. And so the very laws that supported me throughout my life and I benefited from, I can't just disobey them now because it's convenient for me personally. Because if individuals begin ignoring the law, then the entire society will fall apart, especially someone who's well known like me. And not only that, because I've based a lot of my philosophy on those ideas, how can I in good conscience carry on this mode of questioning and philosophizing in a new place, having betrayed Athens, right? I'd be branded as a traitor. And so he's living up to his principles. I mean, he could have certainly just slunk away and lived the life of a private man and, changed his identity, or who knows what some people might have done in those circumstances, but he chooses not to. And it's really extraordinary. And all of us have the benefit of that in some ways. Because if anything, he begins a dialogue with you too, which allows you to begin to consider your own mortality. And it's not something you want to be morbid about and obsess over. That's unhealthy and weird, right? But you do want to begin to consider it. Because I think ultimately what makes Socrates' death palatable is that he lived a meaningful life, and he had a purpose to it. And that's what everyone ultimately, I think, deep down is searching for. Finding it is the difficult piece, right? Especially because we're always distracted by our smaller purposes in life, like what am I going to have for dinner tonight? What can I do to get better grades in school so I can get into better college, right? And often we get distracted by these smaller ends, and we forget the greater ends. And we have a fear of them. We don't want to think about them either, right? When in reality, it makes a lot of sense to think about them, because the fact that life is finite is in fact what gives it value and meaning. If life went on forever, it wouldn't mean anything. It'd be like going to your prom, right? You guys may be looking forward to going to a prom. Now, you would not be looking forward to going to the prom if it went on forever, right? It would be horrible and meaningless. It would be hell. And life is a lot like that, right? You have a beginning, middle, and end, and the trick is to make something out of that middle. And also to be lucky too. There's a lot of fortune involved in that too, because obviously there are some untimely deaths that people unfortunately suffer, right? Or even some meaningless ones, right, that seem to be in vain, but maybe those around them can derive meaning out of it. All right. I do want to save enough time, guys, so we can begin Rome. So what we'll do today, guys, is we'll transition out of Greece, obviously. If we were to do a 30-second synopsis of what happens after the Peloponnesian War, Battle of Leuctra 371, Thebans defeat the Spartans, achieve military supremacy, and then 30 years after that, Philip II basically conquers all of Greece. He's a Greek himself, of course. He's the king of Macedon, and then his son, at his death, takes over and conquers basically the known world, right? All of Egypt, all of Greece, of course, the entire Persian army, and then beyond, all the way to the Indus River in India. He dies very young, and then his empire is divided up among 5 of his leading generals. And that is what gives you the Hellenistic world. All right, now we kind of backtrack a little bit, and this is interesting. We're going to talk about the mythic origins of the Roman people, at least how they imagined their mythic origins. A lot of this, of course, is impossible to verify, but it's pretty standard practice. You can go all around the globe, and you can find these foundational stories of certain people, be they Native Americans, people in Asia, Africa, everywhere, right? People have myths to describe their founding because the founding of them is generally well before recorded history. The United States is a very bizarre example in that respect in terms of our government. But even then we sort of mythologize things, this whole idea of George Washington chopping down a cherry tree and not being able to lie about it. That could be a true story, I suppose, but I think it's mainly a story that is meant to embody a value that we hold in high regard for our leaders. That is to tell the truth, right? Because it's so important to a functional society. All right, so let me share my screen with you guys, and I'll go through a couple interesting stories. This is more of a myth day, although the nexus of myth and history is always kind of difficult to unwind. Actually, I want to look at my other one. There we go. All right, so let me take you way back. All right, can anyone tell what event this might be? This horse here is the key to it all. What city's burning here? He's one of their patron deities, actually.
Rome?
Not Rome. Good idea. Rome does get sacked a couple times, but this horse is the key to it.
Howard? No.
One of the most famous horses in all of history.
Trojan horse, right?
There you go. Yep, there you go. This is Troy burning, right? It's a painting from the 18th century. Why are we going back here to talk about the origins of Rome? Well, because this is how the Romans imagined their founding. Sorry, we got chat coming in. For some reason,
Mr. Lake, are you showing like a painting? Because all I see are the assignments.
Okay, yeah, sorry. Thank you very much. Yeah, because I was on the wrong one. Okay. Yeah, I can't change. You can see it now, right?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Thank you for telling me that. That's pretty amazing that Kevin answered this without even seeing it. All right, so yes, this is Trojan. This is Troy burning. So why on earth are we talking about the Trojan War? I thought we were done with that stuff, right? Dr. Lake, you said we were done with talking about Greek stuff. Well, because this is where the Italian people view their origins, and there is some truth to this. In fact, if you go to Tuscany, for example, and you can do genetic tests on the people and the cattle, and there is very clear Near Eastern origins to some of the people that inhabit that area of Italy. So this is kind of fascinating. So it's one of those weird things where you can't quite entangle what is myth and what is history. But this particular myth is about a man named Aeneas. You can just barely make him out here. He's giving someone a piggyback. We'll talk about that in a moment. We can barely make him out. But his story is most famously told by a Roman poet. He's the greatest of the Roman poets, a man named Virgil. Has anyone ever heard of Virgil before?
Yeah. Wasn't he like kind of like with Dante Alighieri?
Yes, absolutely. That's amazing that you know that, Michaela. That's impressive. That's awesome. Yeah, so he is actually, he in Dante's Divine Comedy, which is written in the 15th century, one of the greatest works of literature of all time for sure. He chooses Virgil as his guide through the first part of the underworld, right? In part because he's his poetic inspiration for writing this great epic, which is a Christian epic. Whereas Virgil is writing this great epic to explain the origins of the Italian people, right? And not so much just their origins, their physical origins, but also their religious origins, their values that they hold most dearly as a culture, and what they're tied to. And the title of this particular work is called The Aeneid, because it's describing the journeys and the heroic exploits of this man right here, Aeneas. Now, who is Aeneas? Well, first of all, he's the son of Anchises. That's the guy on his back here. We'll look at a different photo of that in a second. And Venus. All right, so Venus is his mother. That's a heck of a mom to have, right? If you think your moms are protective and powerful when you're threatened, imagine if Venus was your mother. That also means he's a hero, of course, too, right? Heroes always have these special births, and we'll talk a lot about that today. That is to say, they very often, or I would say always, have some sort of ambiguous birth and or a birth that involves a divine parent and an earthly parent. So they somehow kind of meet, make those worlds meet in their person, right? Harry Potter is a great example. Perhaps the greatest example in the history of humanity is Christ himself, right? He's got an earth mother and father, Joseph and Mary, but then he has a divine sky father as well. And his birth is ambiguous and it's miraculous because he's born from a virgin, right? At any rate, Aeneas is a Trojan, all right? That means he's a loser in this particular conflict. He does not immediately accept the fact that his city is lost. Because of the ruse of the Trojan horse, there's no recovering from this, right? The Trojans do bravely do battle, and Aeneas joins in it, but he's visited by his divine parent who tells him, you must go, right? You have a greater fate in store for you, and you have to leave the past behind to create a greater future. That's the first important lesson in many ways of this great epic. That is to say, you have to have a nuanced relationship to the past. On the one hand, you must preserve the past because it has some foundational aspects that will guide your behavior. On the other hand, you can't be so attached to the past that you don't realize when the world is changing and you're unable to adapt to it. So you must have this complicated relationship to the past, right? And if any of you have ever dealt with loss before, right? First, let me say I'm sorry, right? Because loss, traumatic loss, especially when you're young, is very difficult to recover from. But it's one of those things where it will make you stronger in the end if you're able to adapt to it and learn lessons and face future dangers or things that you may be afraid of as a result of that loss, right? Like my father died when I was 7, so I can say from personal experience, right? Something like that is very traumatic and very difficult to get over, and it's defined a lot of my life. But it's also made me a much better person in an infinite variety of ways. But you have to let go of that past in order to move on to the future, right? And letting go of that past doesn't mean repressing it and never thinking about it. It means confronting it fully, and then salvaging what can be salvaged, but letting go of the rest, right? Because you can't change the past after all. Now, as he's escaping, I'll show you a beautiful, beautiful work of art. Probably my favorite sculptor here. So this is sculpted by a man named Bernini. You may have heard of him, I don't know. He's a Baroque sculptor, which means that he was operating in a time period which is immediately following the Renaissance. So the Baroque follows the Renaissance. So the last Renaissance piece we looked at the School of Athens, if you remember last time, and that was painted between 1509 and 1511. This was sculpted between 1617 and 1618. So we fast forward 100 years in the future in terms of art. And Bernini is known for these very complicated pieces because he is a Baroque sculptor. So that means they have complicated perspective. If you look at this from different areas, you can see different things. They're also masterpieces of artistry. Look how complicated. You can see his individual ribs. You can see the old man's skin sagging versus the taut, strong skin of the young man, so on and so forth. And also look how complicated this is. This was a single block of marble, guys. And I don't know what on earth kind of special gifts you need as an artist to turn one block of marble into this 3-figured piece. It's unbelievable. Or you could even argue it's a 4-figured piece. All right, so who are we looking at? Well, this is Aeneas. He's actually modeled after a very famous sculpture of Michelangelo of Jesus, with Jesus bearing a cross with his exact shape of his body and everything. So there's a Christian undertone to this that Bernini is trying to summon. But this is Aeneas, and it's him escaping the burning ruins of Troy. And who does he bring with him? Well, it's instructive. He's got his little young son, Ascanius. When he goes to rescue his father as Troy burns, his father says, "No, son, I'm too old and weak. I've reached the end of my days. Please, I'll slow you down. You might die if you take me." Right? Aeneas, realizing what of the past is important, ignores his father's wishes, picks him up in his shoulder, and is able to escape the burning ruins of the city. Now, he takes something else with him, too. Don't have that. Oh, I never know what direction I'm going here. Here it is. Here's a couple of other angles, guys, just so you can get a sense of what you're looking at. Now, here's the other thing that's very important that he takes. So he takes the penates. Probably not a term you've heard before, but these are the household gods that Romans held very dear. So notice the thing he saves from his burning civilization is a representative of their cultural and religious values. So what Aeneas is already doing is he's beginning to move in the right path here. So he's leaving behind of what of the past cannot be salvaged and is not worth salvaging, and he's taking with him what can build a better future. Because it's not the buildings or the earth underneath the buildings that make a city, or it's not the buildings that make a school, let's say, or it's not the building that makes your family, right? You could move to any apartment and you're still your family. And the reason for that is because wherever you go, you're going to take with you the things that guide you forward into the future, that form the foundation of your values and, well, the things that give your life purpose and value and meaning. And that is represented all in these figures here, like a Christian nowadays might save from the burning ruins of his house a Bible or the cross he wears around his neck, let's say, right? And while I'm speaking, think about what you might save, right? Is there something symbolic in your house that you'd like to save and preserve if everything else is going to be lost? Could be a pet, could be a family photo, I don't know. But if you think about those things, it will tell you a lot about what is important to you. So quite a load to be carrying here. And this is hardly the end of difficulties for Aeneas. He's going to leave Troy and then look at this journey, right? He's going to go all over the Mediterranean world. And for years and years and years, he's going to travel and deal with monsters and storms and sometimes the foolishness of his crew, sometimes the foolishness of himself. His father's going to die here in Sicily, so he's going to have to move on from that, on and on and on until he finally gets to Italy. I do want to pause and talk about one stop he does make that's sort of famous and interesting, and it's toward the end of his journey. He comes to this city of Carthage in northern Africa. Does anyone know what country might be here nowadays? It starts with a T.
Turkey?
Not Turkey. So Turkey's actually all the way over here. Not a bad guess at all, though. So modern day, you'd have Egypt down here. You'd have Libya right here, right? This is modern day Tunisia, right? And I pause here for a moment because it's pregnant with meaning, right? So Carthage, we know for a fact, is a Phoenician colony. All right. So, and it's founded by the city of Sidon, right? So Sidon is a city. It's relatively close to modern day Jerusalem, right? It would be in modern day Palestine, and it would be close to the Syrian border as well. So it's right in this area of land. That's the gateway to the Middle East. And the Phoenicians were phenomenal sailors. I think we might have mentioned them before. They invented the alphabet, which is why we say something is phonetic when it's spelled according to how it sounds. This civilization, maybe like Athens and Sparta in the Peloponnesian War, or maybe like Persia and Greece during the Persian War, is going to be on a collision course with Rome. Because whereas the Greeks and Romans will mainly colonize and control at first this northern area of the Mediterranean, they don't do a whole lot down here in Africa, right? But there's a parallel civilization being constructed on the northern coast of Africa, and it's all centered around Carthage, who also controls Corsica, Sardinia, and also a large portion of the Mediterranean coast of Spain. So this is basically an empire, all right? And it's going to eventually come into dire conflict with Rome. They have a famous general, Hannibal. Does anyone know the name of this series of wars that Rome has with Carthage? Starts with a P. When I say it, it may be familiar to you. So Hannibal, you may have heard of, right? He famously takes an army in the Second Punic War, sails all the way up to the French Riviera, and then marches his army across the Alps including elephants, which is insane and just difficult and crazy. And then for years, he harasses the Italian countryside. He even gets a lot of towns to come over to his side because he's such a brilliant general. If the Romans and the Carthaginians were fighting on fair ground, but the Italians are defending their own homeland, he would have crushed them. There's no doubt about it. Far more skilled and with a better army and everything than the Italians. But the Italians, because they're mainly fighting a defensive war, are able to hold out. But this is one of those great turning points in the history of humanity, really. Yep, got a question coming in here. Punic Wars, yep, Jennifer, Jennifer did have it, yep, excellent. And it's one of those great turning points, right? So we talked about at Marathon, for example, if the Athenians had not helped the Persians there, Greek history just doesn't exist after that, right? We would never be talking about it. And the people who would populate this area would be very different people. And the values that they represented of democracy and all these things that we hold so dear and have informed our lives so much just simply wouldn't exist, right? No Greek literature, none of that, right? Same thing here, right? If the Carthaginians had defeated the Romans, we would not be talking about a Roman Empire, right? We'd be talking about an empire that was centered on the African continent, and that would likely have spread over all of the southern Mediterranean, right? Because Carthage ends up being a really important city for the Romans after they conquer it, right? Because it just has a great location. I mean, look at this. Look at the location here. It's just a brilliant location, right in the center of the Mediterranean. Great navigable area here, an inlet. I mean, it's just perfect. Anyway, what does that have to do with Aeneas? Well, he lands there in the mythological history of this, and he meets a beautiful princess who is also an exile, and her name is Dido. Right? Dido and Aeneas fall madly in love with each other, but Aeneas is once more has to be guided by fate, and the gods actually tell him, "Listen, Aeneas, your fate is not to found this civilization with an African princess, right? Your fate, in fact, is to found the Italian people. You must leave." And I have to go quickly here because I'm realizing we have about 20 minutes. Dido is so distraught by the idea of Aeneas leaving that she feigns piling up all the possessions that she has. It reminds her of Aeneas. She sets this huge fire ablaze, and then in the last minute leaps on it herself to commit suicide. Right, so that's how much of an effect that Aeneas has on her. Right, but it is this kind of foreshadowing event of the eventual second destruction of Carthage at the hands of the Roman people. All right, so finally, Aeneas lands in Italy. All right, let's fast forward a little bit. Now, he's got a big problem when he lands in Italy. There's a king there. His name is Latinus. That's where we get Latin from. Latinus has gotten a prophecy, and we've seen again and again how prophecies are always so important in these historical narratives. And the prophecy is that his daughter will marry or must marry to be successful a foreigner. The problem, however, is that King Latinus has already promised his daughter in marriage to a local prince by the name of Turnus. The next thing you know, Aeneas shows up. He's a foreign prince, right? The prophecy seems as if it's all falling in line with this one difficulty of this previous engagement. What ensues, of course, when Latinus withdraws that engagement to Turnus is war. So poor Aeneas, with his exiled followers, they've escaped the burning ruins of Troy only to find new war here, and then consider the parallels. What caused war there? Well, a Trojan by the name of Paris stealing away a woman by the name of Helen. What causes war here? Well, a Trojan stealing away a woman, and then going, and then that man fighting for her honor, right? Whereas here, the Trojans lost. Here, the Trojans win, right? Aeneas shows his martial valor. He's able to unite his followers with the Latin people, and with their combined forces, they defeat Turnus and the Rutilians, and, well, the rest is history, right? He founds a line of kings that's a combination of these Near Eastern people and the native inhabitants, and they become very prosperous. His son, that little boy you saw in the statue, founds a city called Alba Longa. All right. Now, fast forward 13 generations into the future, right? Because remember, we're like in almost the 1200s at the end of the war, right? We're going to fast forward all the way to 700 something BC. 13 generations later, his descendants are still happily ruling. One problem, however, when it comes to the next succession, and we talked a little bit about how the succession of leadership in states is often a bloody affair. This is no exception here. The current king is a man named Procus. He has two sons, an older son named Numitor, and a younger son named Aemulius. Now, we don't know exactly what caused such bitter contention between these two brothers, but we will see that feuding brothers will occupy an absurdly large piece of the narrative of Roman history. And I mean all the way up into the period of civil wars and the many, many civil wars that characterize the empire and also the republic. And so it's fitting, perhaps, that one of the earliest myths of the foundation of the city of Rome itself centers upon this problem of feuding brothers. And you guys probably feel it yourself, you know, like your brother or sister, if you have one, they're probably the person you love the most in the world, maybe, but they're also the person you probably fight with the most, and the person that you feel the most intense rivalry with, right? You want to be better than them, and you maybe compete for your parents' affection when you were little. Who knows what you did, right? Those things get expressed in all kinds of funny ways. Like my wife, when she's the oldest of three, and when her parents brought home her baby sister, you know, like this is what 3-year-olds do, you know, like you just can't deal with the fact that your parents have been taken away by your stupid younger sibling, and she bit her little sister's leg, you know, just not knowing any better. And maybe you guys have some funny stories in your family about that sort of thing. All right, this one's not a funny one though. All right, so when Procus dies, Numitor has the right to the throne as the eldest son. Aemulius, however, whose name actually sounds like the Roman word for jealousy, by the way, Aemulius deposes him. He drives him out of the kingdom and takes possession of the kingship, right? Totally unjustly, obviously, just does it by force. Not only that, he also kills Numitor's sons and his last child, Rhea Silvia. He forces her to become a Vestal virgin. All right, now let me show you a picture of what a Vestal virgin would have looked like in antiquity. All right, that's a Vestal virgin, guys. What modern person looks just like this? Modern class of people in the Catholic Church looks just like a
nuns.
A nun, and there's a reason for that, because as you guys may know, Rome, throughout its empire, is a pagan state until the rule of Constantine in the 300s AD. He prevails in a civil war against Maxentius at the Battle of the Milvian Bridge in 321. Before the battle, he sees the sign of the cross in the clouds. He takes that as a very important symbol, and when he's victorious in the battle, he passes the Edict of Milan, which thereafter makes Christianity legal in the Roman Empire. And then shortly after that, Christianity becomes the official religion of the Roman Empire. And the reason there are several billion Catholics in the world today is because of that moment in history. And Vestal virgins have an easy transition over to nuns, right? They even dress the same to this very day, which is a crazy thing to think about. And of course, they take a vow of chastity. And that's Numitor's plan, right? He's driven his brother out. He's killed both of his brother's sons. And now he's forced his daughter to be a virgin, thereby, in his mind, eliminating all future claims to his throne and his family's control of it. One difficulty, however, enters the picture, right? You've got the god Mars, right? You can tell because he's a bearded male. He kind of looks just like a regular general, however, I suppose. And he's got this sword. As legend would have it, he conceives a child with Rhea Silvia. All right, not a child, however, I should say, but he conceives twins. All right, so now let's think about this family tree a little bit. We've got Aeneas, the son of Venus, and now we have his future descendant in Romulus and Remus. Those are the names of these twins. They are the sons of Mars. So you can see the two opposing forces, love and war, are going to be the parents, basically, of the Roman people, right? Now, you can imagine Numitor's anger at this and also doubt at this story, right? She's supposed to be a virgin, and now all of a sudden she's pregnant, right? In the classical era, what would happen to a Vestal virgin if she became pregnant? They would throw her into a hole, and they would bury her in stones, bury her alive with stones, right? It was a very harsh penalty. So Numitor is not much happier than your classical Romans will be with this sort of behavior. He doesn't believe for a minute that Mars is the real father of these children. But remember, with heroes, guys, heroes always have this problem of ambiguous parentage, right? Christ with Joseph and God, Hercules with Zeus versus his earthly father, Harry Potter. You know, you can go to literally every hero that's ever existed in literature or in a religious tradition, and they have this special ambiguous parentage, in part because all of us have that special ambiguous parentage. We all have a base material existence, but through our deeds in life, we can prove that we're more than just the atoms that make us up, right? We have a spiritual existence that transcends that. And if you're a guy like Socrates or Christ, you transcend it so completely that you essentially achieve immortality, right? If you're good enough, right? And that's how you prove that you are the son of a god. All right, now, what happens? Well, you got this problem with these twins. She gives birth to the twins, and Numitor orders that they must be exposed and killed. And so he orders her to lay them afloat on the Tiber River so they can die. Does this sound like any other hero from history? Well, if you know your biblical history, it does. Yeah, Kevin, who's it sound like?
Well, there's Moses, but then
Absolutely.
like, isn't there? Then one of them becomes someone special or something.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, very good, Kevin. Yeah, this is the story of Moses, right? Now, did the Romans and the Jews talk to each other? Absolutely not, right? But this is all. But it just goes to show how common these different patterns are in the hero story. It's fascinating. But yeah, that's what happens to Moses, right? So it's when the Jews are enslaved by the Egyptians, and Pharaoh says that the Jews have to kill all of their firstborn sons, and Moses' parents, put Moses on a little wicker basket and set him afloat on the Nile, hoping that he might survive. And in fact, he gets picked up by the daughter of the Pharaoh, and she raises him in the kingdom. Eventually, Moses understands his real origins, and he raises up a rebellion against the Pharaoh and leads the Jews out of slavery in Egypt, parts the Red Sea, gives them the Ten Commandments, etc., so on and so forth, right? And again, all of humanity has now benefited from that, right? The Ten Commandments are basically the foundation of every legal code that's ever been made. At any rate, Romulus and Remus are set afloat. They're lucky. The Tiber River is flooding at this time, and when the floods recede, they're just in a bed of reeds. They're on dry land. Now, as babies will do, they cry. Here's where the story gets really strange, but this is also something very common in hero stories. A she-wolf comes to their aid and suckles them and keeps them alive until a shepherd and his wife discover the babies, right? What a strange thing, but this is again what happens all the time with heroes, right? They have a special relationship to their animal selves, and or they have deep understanding of the natural world. Part of that is because for a human being to be properly powerful and integrated, you have to take the animal part of yourself, right? Think about that, the Platonic conception of the reptilian brainstem, your desiring part. You have to take that, let's say, your capacity for violence, and know when to wield it justly, because violence is necessary. It's a necessary part of human life. But it can be so easily abused, right? So if a lion is attacking your family, you better be strong enough to be able to get it away from your family. Or if a thief bursts into your home in the middle of the night and wants to kill your wife and children, you better be strong enough to do something about it, right? You have to be able to summon that animal instinct to eliminate threat. But you can't use it too much, right? Because then you become a tyrant and become a dangerous individual and violent and not lawful, right? So there's a fine line you have to walk with that. All right. So no one knows where these babies came from, of course. Faustulus and Laurentia raised them, but they are extraordinary, as you can imagine, right? These are the sons of Ares, and they're also royalty. So quickly becomes apparent from their deeds and just their character and their way of behavior that they're very special young men. And they spend a lot of their time robbing robbers. So they spend time using that capacity for violence, which you can imagine is pretty strong in them, given that they're Ares children. And like Robin Hood, they steal from these robbers that have committed thefts, and they return the property to their rightful owners. It just so happens, however, and I'll have to go quickly through this because we've got 5 minutes. One of the robbers complains to the king, Aeneas, and Aeneas takes Remus into prison. He's fooled by the thief, and that's what happened with bad kings, of course. And Aeneas is definitely a bad king. In the meantime, kind of skip to the end of the story because we don't have too much time. It becomes clear, or people begin to have suspicions, that these twins must be those lost twins of Rhea Silvia, right? This really terrifies this really terrifies Aeneas, as you can imagine, but it really makes Numitor excited, and he reveals, as does Faustulus, the identity to the twin boys, so they realize who they really are, right? Sort of like the Tarzan myth too, right? Or the Jungle Book myth even. Anyway, they resolve to take up arms. Romulus storms the king's castle, kills Aeneas, and installs his grandfather Numitor on his rightful throne. Here's where things take a turn for the worse. These young men, they're of royal blood, and they're so powerful and strong, and they have such a following now that they want to make a name for themselves, like all young people do, right? When you leave the security of home, like some of you guys might be doing, in fact, as boarding students next year. That's a really big life change, and it's awesome for you. And so they decide to found a city of their own. And they go up the Tiber where they were first discovered. Right? They figure that's a good place. Romulus begins making a settlement on the Palatine Hill, which is one of the 7 famous hills of Rome. Remus begins making a little settlement on the Aventine Hill, one of the famous hills. But they need to decide which of the twins will be the actual leader of this area. Here's where conflict comes in. Here's where brotherly dissension comes in. They decide they'll make the appointment by means of religious affairs. So augury will decide it, and augury will be incredibly important to Roman civilization. It's reading bird signs, which to me and you sounds completely insane, and well, it kind of is. It's literally looking at the flight of birds and then trying to predict the future from it. But that's the decision they make. Remus sees 6 birds fly over his city, and he sees them first. But immediately thereafter, Romulus sees 12 birds fly over his city. And so they have an argument, and their followers have an argument, and things get really heated. Remus says, I'm king. I saw birds first. Romulus says, no, I'm king because I saw twice as many as you did. Right? They get in this horrible fight. Remus, to mock Romulus, leaps over his wall, right? Because it's still the beginning of the city. And Romulus says to him, I will do exactly what shall happen to all intruders who leap over my wall for the rest of history. And he kills his brother dead. And that's why the city is Rome and not Rheims. All right. I brought it to an end right in time. I wish I had some more time for questions, guys. But if you have questions while I'm showing you this, please let me know. It's crazy stories, I realize. But here's your assignment for next time, guys. It's going to be just like what we did when we first started our study of the history of Greece. So you'll watch this video. It's made by the same people. It's literally like 1,500 years of history in 20 minutes. And you'll make an outline summarizing the big, important pieces of that, so you can, because these will be the touchstones when we go in depth in things, the deeper and deeper we go into Roman history. All right. So same thing, and learn from what you did with your last outline. Some of you did just unbelievably outstanding work. And some of you I gave some constructive criticism, I hope too. So even better work next time, and that's how we always improve. All right, thank you guys. Thank you. And sorry to go over a little bit here. All right, take care, guys.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Take care. Bye-bye.